Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, you are an amazing person. The world's a better place because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe, you get a bonus reading on every single episode. On this episode, we talk to Margaret. This is a phenomenal episode. So many great lessons about how to embrace change, how to bring a unique perspective to solve new problems, and how a true commitment to ethics and to values can really change and impact the lives of your employees and the people around you. I think you're going to really love it. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, Margaret. How's it going?
Very good. How are you?
Good. Very excited to get you on here. Why don't we just dive right in? I always like to start with hearing about what got you into this field. You know, very few of us grow up dreaming of being in the ethics and compliance field when we're kids, and yet we all kind of find ourselves here. What was your path like?
Well, for me, neither ethics nor law, frankly, was the start of my career. I grew up in IT. I have an undergrad in computer science, and I spent the first 5-7 years of my professional career in the IT field. I was one of those original girls who coded. It's very popular now. At the time, I didn't know it was so special. I grew up in an IT family, frankly. So that was a natural progression for me. Mid-career, in my late 20s, I decided to go to law school. And again, I didn't go to law school to practice law. I frankly wanted to broaden my horizons from a highly technical degree to a more humanities degree, more business-oriented legal field. And then I started in the law school and loved every moment of it. By the time I graduated, there was nothing else I wanted to do. But again, none of it was about ethics or compliance. It was about practicing law.
So what was it about law that was attractive for you? Because you're in this field, you're kind of innovating in the sense that, you know, it wasn't there wasn't as many women in it at that time. You know, what kind of caused you to want to make that pivot and pursue something less technical?
Well, that's an interesting question. The part of IT I was very much into data analytics and data conversion. And again, today this is all common. But back in the 80s, if I can date myself that way, it was innovative. And the area of my work was related to M&A. While I worked for large companies, the nature of my skills put me in a position where I was supporting the business as they were acquiring other companies. And my job was to help the acquisition integration, make sure that we take systems on and data on as an integrated organization. So in that role, I was naturally dealing with mergers and acquisitions professionals, many of whom were lawyers. And also, it was, even though I was fairly young in the field, it was a board-facing role because data was important, and there were periodic quarterly reports to the board of directors on how we were doing, how we were testing the integrity of data, et cetera, et cetera. And that exposed me to areas that were not technical, but more business-focused, more esoteric, and communication was critical. And frankly, some mentors of mine, and it's very important in life to have mentors, they told me that I was really good at what I did, but I should work on my presentation skills. I can't show up at the board meeting and give everybody a flow chart. I have to.
They don't speak flow chart. Yeah,
exactly. You have to assess your audience, and they recommended that I broaden my education. I think when they were making these recommendations, they were more focused on an advanced communication class than a law degree. But long story short, I was in my late 20s and progressing very well in my career. And members of my team were 20 years older than I was. And so you look to the right, you look to the left and saying, this is all there is. How am I going to progress if my peers are twice as old as I am, and my subordinates are twice as old as I am. So I need to do potentially something else. And so, to make a long story short, I ended up at the University of Michigan with an idea that I would broaden my horizons and come back into business, not practicing law, but as a business executive. But life took me elsewhere. And so, again, none of it is yet ethics or compliance. All of it is now technology and law. But as I started practicing law and having significant companies as my clients, the issues of compliance first and ethics then came into focus, because my early years of practice was international M&A, cross-border M&A, and you can imagine there are a lot of issues specific to compliance and ethics in that field. And I was a young professional, no question about it, but I was observing companies that, for example, never did business outside of the United States and were suddenly acquiring businesses in Europe, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Asia, and encountering problems that they were not equipped to handle. And so while I was an M&A lawyer, as we were helping these companies through due diligence and through integration, I was now partnering with other members of my firm and expanding my own area of expertise and learning new things. And that eventually brought me in-house with one of my clients.
So that's so interesting. How did that technical background that you had help you become a better, lawyer? Like, did you see any leverage during law school? And then I'd love to also hear, as an M&A attorney, where you had this really technical integration of all these different data systems. Obviously, the board needs to validate whether the acquisition they did is meeting its investment hurdle or whatever the projections were, which obviously require an integration of these data pools in order to come up with whatever the bottom line is. How did you see that experience really kind of add some value to your time in law school, but then more importantly, make you a better M&A attorney?
Well, I think my time in law school was very much impacted by my ability to leverage technology to learn. And today it's more relevant, I think, than it was back in the 80s and 90s, because today, as we are challenged by use of AI and use of automation in the practice of law, all lawyers are faced with it. But now let's take it back 20 years. And most people who went into law school didn't like numbers and didn't particularly care about technology, unless you were a patent lawyer and that's what you wanted to do.
Right.
But it's most of my peers in law school were political science undergrad or philosophy undergrad, or sometimes business undergrad, definitely, but very few were in technology unless they were very focused on practicing patent law. So the way I saw it, the way I absorbed information was very different than my peers, but in many respects it was helpful. Think about what people think about law school, right? Lots of books, long cases, et cetera, but at the end of the day, it's ability to organize and absorb, consume information. And so my training as a computer professional and my experience in data analytics allowed me to consume a lot of information very quickly, organize the information very quickly, and in a manner different to my peers, which created very interesting dialogue during the case studies and training groups, and during even the Socratic method in the law school classroom. So it was fun. I mean, it was interesting. I know that I often found myself looking at information slightly different than peers in the room, and it created some very interesting conversations, and in many respects achieved my objective of broadening my horizons, because it taught me how to think differently, but I hope it also helped others think differently as well.
Yeah, I'd imagine that most of your peers probably hadn't been talking to boards prior to coming to law school, and they hadn't been doing M&A and all that kind of stuff,
Again, there are people who go to law school after years of working.
Sure.
which was my case. I was 7-year professional, and maybe in that regard, older than other people in my particular law school. Most peers were recently graduated. That is not the case today, interestingly enough. The better and more elite law schools have many professionals there who've joined after several years of working. But again, taking us back 20 years, the practice was different. And in my case, I had a lot of business experience that others perhaps did not have. So when you asked me a question a moment ago, is how my technology background differentiated and contributed to my legal experience, that was in many respects secondary. It was my business experience that really helped, both as I went through law school, but actually more importantly, as I started practicing law.
Well, yeah, and like you mentioned that you were working alongside a lot of attorneys, and those attorneys, and I think I love M&A attorneys. I think they're very smart. I have an M&A background myself, and some of the smartest attorneys I know are M&A folks because they have this knack for being able to like know what matters and what doesn't matter, and they can bring this sort of like expected value thinking to the decisions that are coming and really become better advisors to the decision makers in that deal or whatever. So just having been go ahead.
Yeah, I think the key issue really is understanding your client and understanding your client's appetite for risk and approach to risk. Because at the end of the day, as an advisor, whether you are an outside counsel or in-house, you are an advisor to your client. You're a support system to your client, and understanding the client's needs is very critical to be effective, whether it's practice of law or, frankly, ethics and compliance, because you really need to understand what is your client priority.
That's a really interesting way you put that. Jumping ahead a little bit, there's a big discussion in our space about ethics and compliance, not being apart from the business, but rather being a part of the business. And everybody talks about how we can be trusted advisors to the organization. But you made a really nuanced distinction between what a trusted advisor is. The advisor is a function of who they are advising to some degree. It's not sort of this, where we're standing outside of reality and saying what's right and wrong and so forth, because many times we live in the gray and the answer is not always that clear. So do you find that, in general, and, maybe you don't have a perspective on this, but knowing you, I bet you do. Do you find in general that like people in this space struggle with that distinction? Like me being an advisor is really, I need to resonate and understand my business better if I'm going to actually be an advisor, as opposed to like what turns into sort of an ethereal kind of platitude or something of, that they can't really actualize.
It's a very interesting question. I remember kind of early in my career as a young partner in the law firm, talking to the general counsel of a client and talking about issues that were focused on compliance. And he smiled at me and said, "Margaret, I'm a chief legal officer, not a chief compliance officer. And I'm not a chief ethics officer. I'm a chief legal officer. So I want to talk in terms of what is legal and what is not. Whereas you are talking about what is regulatorily required or what is the right thing to do." And that was an epiphany to me in some respects, because there is a big difference between finding your route to a most expedient, legally appropriate solution versus stepping back and being a champion of the company's brand and still doing things legally and still doing things appropriately, but also in a way that is not just legally appropriate, but serves the needs of the business in a grander scheme of things. That has always been my preference. And I think we don't always have that luxury, right? I think it's very, very important to be thoughtful and mindful when you decide to go in-house with a company, because you want to make sure that the company's values and priorities align with your own. As an outside counsel, I think you have a lot more flexibility. You can fire your client if, for one reason or another, their values do not match your own. As an in-house counsel or a head of a compliance function, you've really made that choice the day you joined the company.
Yeah, you're living under the, the banner of that flag. You're wearing that jersey now. And so you have to kind of
have an opportunity, and you should always have the opportunity to have a seat at the table and help the business understand the consequences of the decisions they make. But the notion that a lawyer or a compliance officer will waltz into an organization that has its values, has its principles, and suddenly make a 180-degree change is very ambitious and aspiring, but probably not very realistic.
So do you feel like that epiphany moment when you were talking with that chief legal officer who so clearly made the distinction between, hey, I'm a chief legal officer, not a chief compliance officer or a chief ethics officer. How did that influence you when you were, outside counsel? And then how did that perhaps influence how you chose where you would go in-house?
It was very telling. It was a very learning moment, if you would, because the comment made in jest stuck with me.
Right. And many a truth is said in jest, you know what I mean?
And frankly, when I made the decision to go in-house, I was as much interviewing the organization as it was interviewing me to make sure that it was the right place to add value, because it had to align with my values, and also was an opportunity for me to bring value to the organization in a way that was, again, aligned with the organization's priorities.
Do you feel like you need a certain confidence in order to really gauge that when you're looking for a new opportunity? I guess what I'm trying to say is, just because a shoe doesn't fit doesn't mean that your foot is wrong. Like, you have to find the shoes that actually fit. You know what I'm saying? But I find that sometimes when someone's looking for a job, and this might not be related to you directly, but sometimes when people are looking for a job, you start to fall into this self-preservation mode where you're just like, I just got to find something. And, any port in a storm, maybe you don't want to go to that port. Does it take a confidence? Does it take a longer term view in order to not wind up under prioritizing exactly what you're talking about, you think?
I've been very blessed in my life that I had the options, right? Not everybody has options, and one needs to be realistic. For me, I practiced in a great law firm, ended up going in-house with a client that was very much a great match to the things that were important to me. I was with that company for 15 years, and I moved on only because the next opportunity gave me an option to frankly do it again. My first in-house role, we took the company from $1 billion to $6 billion.
Wow.
And
that's wild. That's such a wild ride, I'm sure.
It was a wild ride. I like the way you put it. And it's an amazing ride to have in your career. And then for any companies that grows like that, there comes a period of a slower growth or perhaps stagnation. And at that point, you're seeking that energy again. So I had another opportunity 15 years later to join another $1 billion business and help grow it as well. So, but yes, for me, going back to your question, I think it takes experience, maybe even more than confidence, to understand the organization you're joining and asking questions that are important to you. But again, it's important to understand that not everybody has that luxury, right? But at the same time, and the word of advice I would give to somebody who wonders that they need a job and need job desperately, and perhaps stepping into an organization they're not entirely comfortable with, is that if you are not comfortable during the interview process, chances are rather high that it will be a DNA rejection. So trust your gut, as they say, that things do not get better. People put their best foot forward during the interview process. And if your gut tells you at that point that it's not a good fit, trust your gut.
Right.
And by the way, I subscribe to the same notion when I interview people to join my organization. Somebody may be brilliant on paper, but as you interview them, if you feel that your spidey sense is telling you something is not a good fit, trust your spidey sense.
Yeah, that's good advice. I try to tell myself that if I'm interviewing somebody and if it's an I don't know, it's a no because it's not a yes. Like if it's a yes, it's a yes. If it's an I don't know, it's not a yes. You know what I mean?
A couple of days ago, we extended an offer to a candidate that honestly, before she left my office, I knew she was a must hire.
You knew.
And that I knew. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not egotistical enough to rely only on myself. We have an interview process where several people interview a candidate, and you want to collect that information and have that perspective from others. Because as they say, you can misrepresent yourself some of the time to some of the people, but not all of the time to all of the people. So I definitely believe in multi-person interview process, but once in a while you have this candidate and you're saying a must hire, absolutely. And then of course you collect information from others and you hope that your gut was right. But those are amazing experiences. Usually you're not that lucky. You kind of say, as you said, maybe. There are a lot of things I like about this candidate, but I still have some questions. I think we're diverging from the discussion of compliance and ethics, but
you know what? It's all one thing at the end of the day. It's all people, and it's all about how do we make better decisions, in my mind. I mean, how do we navigate this thing? Because I mean, I love this space because it's such a combination of so much stuff. Like to be great in this space, you have to be great at hiring, and you have to be great at influence. You have to be great at understanding the business, and you have to be great at communicating. It's like, it's everything. It's like every single, tool in the toolbox we need to be good at, or our team needs to be good at it if we're going to really fulfill our mandate to the greatest extent. And then also that allows us to talk about whatever we want.
Fair enough. But one thing you named in the laundry list you mentioned is knowing the business. And I think whether you want to be a good lawyer or a good compliance professional or a head of ethics, first and foremost, in my humble opinion, is you have to know your business.
Right.
You have to know your clients. It's so often that you have people joining the organization and they bring a ton of valuable experience from outside, and you want that, and you want to tap into it, and it's very important. But 6 months in, and you realize they're still talking about their experience in their prior life, and They have not yet invested something into learning the ways of doing business of the organizations that they joined. And that's a missed opportunity. It's not to say that what you bring from outside is not valuable. It absolutely is. That's why we hired you. But please invest in understanding us and figure out how what you bring, whether it's a compliance, ethics, ways of doing business, operations, finance, you name it, help understand how that applies to how this company does business. Otherwise, you will never really maximize the value you can bring to the organization.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like there's nothing more dangerous in life than a know-it-all who's just seen it all. It's like you haven't seen it all, okay? And I mean, and I think it takes a genuine curiosity. It takes a beginner's mind in order to add more to that skill set, add more to that experience list, because what got you here isn't going to get you there.
I love the beginner's mindset. You called it out, very familiar with that concept, and I constantly preach it, especially when you have either your clients or frankly members of your own team who are highly experienced. The young professionals come in and they're sponges. They want to learn, they want to find their groove, etc. But so many experienced people come in, and as you said, they know it all. And I'm sure I fall into that category as well. And it's so important to check yourself, to step back and say, what can I learn here today? I think it's particularly relevant in the legal profession, ethics, compliance profession today, as I think ways of doing business are changing and changing very rapidly.
Great point.
With technology and AI. I cannot tell you every day you see an item in the papers that speaks to this lawyer used AI to misrepresent something or write the briefings and he's getting sanctioned, and somebody else misrepresented the case law, et cetera, and lawyers love to talk about it because I think in self-defense, it makes them think that it's not important. But the truth of the matter is that if you are not embracing technology and you're not embracing AI, you're going to fall behind very quickly. And actually, you're already behind. And it's interesting that people are not ready to hear that message, especially in the legal profession, but we absolutely have to.
So I love what you just said. I have this theory that I was thinking about. So I read this quote. This is an Upton Sinclair quote. This is the guy who wrote that old book, The Jungle. And the famous quote is, it's difficult or it's impossible to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And I have seen this crazy resistance to AI in a couple of different fields. In one field, I mean, I love it. I just think it's so interesting, and I just love, where things are going and how much how much opportunity there is in like this new stuff. But like you see, this is World According to Nick. English majors hate AI, graphic designers hate AI, and I feel like if people are threatened, maybe it's happening on the subconscious level, but like if they're threatened by this thing, then it's almost like they come up with these really like intellectual arguments on why we shouldn't touch it. And like, we've all read that story that you alluded to, but okay, well, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Great.
I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, Nick.
Agree.
I look at it this way. AI is not going to replace lawyers. This is to your notions that people are afraid that they will be replaced, their salary will be replaced. I guarantee you that those who are not embracing technology today will be replaced in 5 years' time. 100%. That much I am willing to bet on. The fact that good lawyers who leverage technology will not be replaced by it, of that I'm confident. Actually, you get to do things where you truly can add value to. I mean, think about my day today, and it's a typical day. We needed to do risk analysis on some things that's going on in the business, and I spent several hours with operations partners and risk partners discussing various points. And then I spent an hour reducing all of it to a deck that we need to present to our board. And that hour was not well spent. The 2 hours I spent debating the risk points, that was important. What my takeaway from the first 3 hours of today is that I better speed up my onboarding on the next tool that can put that deck in for me. I'm very good at, some of my colleagues in the legal department are not very good at PowerPoint. I am very good at PowerPoint. And so I look at it as my great skill, but I just spent an hour. An hour, frankly, that I shouldn't have spent. Now, I could ask my assistant to take care of it, but then I would have spent 15, 20 minutes describing to her what needed to be done. I could have spent the same 15 minutes instructing a tool to produce a deck for me. It probably would have taken less time than instructing another person. And then I would have spent a few minutes tweaking it, and the outcome would have been better, I suspect, because while I'm good at PowerPoint, a good AI tool probably threw some graphics in that I don't have time to deal with and would have factored in my audience, because you do a very different deck for the board of directors versus the team of operations professionals or team of HR professionals. And here's a trick, right? I've started telling you this by telling you I am very good at PowerPoint, and I'm not going to be self-deprecating. I am good at it, but not every lawyer is. Right. And so then now imagine a lawyer who is not very good at it, putting a deck together full of words and non-comprehensible at all. And then it's not a good tool. But if you run it through the AI tool, we don't need to pay my salary to do PowerPoint. We need to pay
Right.
my salary to manage risk or think about how the ethics of decisions we're about to make is going to impact the business and impact our reputation and differentiate us in the marketplace, whatever the other things I need to do, which I would argue AI cannot do as well as I can. But that putting that deck together is a different issue.
Well, it's a phenomenal example because I think which, you said this perfect. You said that like it's going to turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. The people that avoid it, those are going to be the ones who are obsolete, because to your point, the ones who embrace it, I think, are going to be able, like, what it allows you to do is put more of the thing that you actually add value with your brain to work for more of your time. Like, great, you're great at PowerPoint, but like, to your point, that's not what you're being paid for. You're being paid for your brain and your subconscious, and the way that this goal seek mechanism that you've honed over the years of your career can be applied in these myriad different situations with different risks and all that kind of stuff. So when we can create that kind of leverage, we can do more of what we're great at. And if you think about like movies, in my mind, the best directors are also editors. And like, that's really what this allows you to do. You can spend more of your time saying, okay, this matters, this doesn't matter, and really focus in on telling the story that matters most versus sorting through, I mean, there are people who are really bad at PowerPoint, and whatever took you an hour, that might take them an entire day. When in actuality, if they can leverage a tool like this or a technology like this, they can get so much more out of themselves. I just love this point that we're at, and I'm just a little bit puzzled by this general resistance that I see across the space. I mean, what do you think it is? Do you think it's just because people in our space, and again, I'm painting in a really, broad brushstroke here. Do you think it's a fear of change? Do you think it's a natural risk aversion? Like,
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think fear of change is definitely there. My own organization is going through a lot of change right now, so I'm very focused on how you manage organizational change.
Yeah.
And you can apply the same principles, I think, to changes in technology. I think there is this realization in our professions that we spend there is an 80-20. You spend 20% of your time on high value items, and then you spend 80% of your time, 20% on high value items, and 80% of your time on other stuff, which is very important other stuff, because it's not enough to have a great litigation strategy. You also have to write that pleading, right? But I think the tools can help you do it. Now, it does not mean that you have a tool that drafted your pleading and you just submit it to court without reading it.
Right.
That's malpractice. But just like you use your first year associate to write something, and then you as an experienced partner is going to shape it into something else. I think the tool can help you there, so that now you can leverage your first year associate to learn how to think instead of just copy and paste citations from someone.
Yeah. Most chefs have a sous chef who's maybe doing all that mise en place. That doesn't mean that the chef didn't cook the dish. You know what I'm saying? So letting someone else chop up the onions and get everything ready to be combined in the dish, that allows you to make more and better dishes. I just think we have to let go of this thing. And I talk to folks, and what I've noticed is that everybody now, so like there was a little bit of resistance to it. Everybody didn't sort of jump in the pool. Now I'm hearing people say they're caveating everything and saying, I generated this with AI, where it's like, 4 years ago, you weren't saying I worked on this with my associate. You would just kind of present it. I wonder how long that's going to be, where people feel like they have to put an asterisk by what they're talking about because there was some AI involved. Like no one is saying, hey, I submitted this paper, but I just want you to know I used spell check. There were some red lines in there, and those like red lines aren't there, but that was spell check. That wasn't me.
So this is an excellent example, because as I'm sure you've figured out, that I was not born in this country, and I have an accent, and I speak several languages, and English is not my first language. I have vocabulary that I can stand up to anybody in the English language. I know how to put things very well in many respects, which does not mean that I don't have an occasional typo. And the notion that you cannot use Grammarly to fix those for you
It's
does not
insane.
change the fact, right? But I think there are two reasons why people these days caveat and feel compelled to disclose. One is the unfortunate reality that some members of our profession have used AI without attribution and unfortunately did not prove the work and check the work.
Okay, that's a good point.
There's this pressure to be up and up on using AI. I think the other one, in a way, is people want to put it out there. I'm technology savvy.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. That's actually that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not like everyone else. I'm using AI. There might be some of that. Yeah, yeah.
But I like your characterization of it as yet another tool, right? A PowerPoint and Copilot, right? And you're using Grammarly and spell check. I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, right. And at the end of the day, let's just say in theory, I had a board meeting today. Let's say in theory, I didn't, but let's say the whole deck was generated by AI. The view the board has of me or the business is not going to be a function of what's on the screen. It's going to be a function of my performance, so to speak, and my exhibition of my understanding of the business and what's happened over the last quarter and where we're going.
The accuracy of what's in your deck.
Great point.
It used to be that your typing pool would generate your pleadings, right?
Exactly.
I mean, dictate them and somebody types them and then they print them for you and you mark it up. But if you have not marked it up, if you just dictated it and somebody typed it, they probably would not be very good. It is an important iterative process. Who generates that first draft or follows your instructions on the second or third draft is irrelevant. It is the accuracy of the information and creativity of the solution, the thoughtfulness of your presentation and how it responds to the need of your board or your client, whatever the case may be. So I'm not afraid of AI. I actually would love for AI to take half a dozen things off my desk so I can focus on things that truly matter.
Well, and go back to your 80-20 example. If 20% of your time is being spent on the really valuable things and you're able to add 10% to that, that's half as much again. You know what I'm saying? Like there's so much impact that we can multiply ourselves with, or, you know what I'm saying? There's so much, like there's a
productivity and add value. And frankly, also, how about that much coveted work-life balance that is impossible because you're putting in 16-hour days, of which 6 or 7 have been spent on some things that can be outsourced to AI. Nobody is bothered if I outsource something to my contract center of excellence in India. That's okay. But outsourcing it to AI, somehow it's not. I think it's more about people not understanding how to use it.
I think that's right. But I think, well, I feel like I'm learning how to use it all the time. Like, but it comes from me like playing with it. You have to be like, you can, I've said this a couple of times in the past, but like I can spend the entire summer at the library reading books on how to swim, or I can just kind of jump in the pool. You know what I mean? You got to jump in the pool. So let's go back to your first in-house role. You came to this in-house role. What were you working on, and what was kind of surprising about that? Because I mean, again, going from $1 billion to $6 billion, that's a massive increase. But also, $1 billion is a big company already.
Yes, it is. So I joined a large engineering firm as their in-house international counsel. Because they had significant operations on multiple continents, and I had experience as a cross-border M&A lawyer, and they needed that regional expertise. But I was probably the most recent hire from private practice. Many other lawyers on that particular team were exceptional lawyers, but they've mostly spent many years working in-house and in the engineering field. So what I brought to that legal department was not just my international expertise, but also the diversity that came with working for a large law firm and doing so recently. And also in the M&A space, as you've alluded to, you become an expert at a lot of different fields. So one of the key things you learn is how to quickly learn and absorb.
Yeah, and how to get smart fast.
You get smart fast, exactly. Otherwise, you can't survive. You're not going to. So at that time, two things were happening in the company, neither of which, frankly, leveraged my experience as an international lawyer. One was that the company was rapidly growing in the public sector space, working for both state and local and the federal government. That was a new expansion line of business for them. And they did not have any in-house lawyers at that time who were subject matter experts. So they needed to hire from outside. And I was a recent addition to the department from outside. So my general counsel at the time said, hey, can you help us identify the right outside counsel? But once you hire an outside counsel, and I promise you this will get us to ethics and compliance space, because once you hire an outside counsel, you also become the liaison, right? The interface between what's going on in the company in this space and this outside counsel. So while I relied extensively on the outside counsel to help us learn how do you do business in state and local space, or how do you do business with the federal government, you also become a subject matter expert by default. Right. And one of the things that quickly became apparent is that as a contractor to a federal government, you had to have an active whistleblower policy, an active hotline. And while the company had exceptional values, and it was a company that grew up as an engineering professional company with people who put ethics above all else, they didn't have any policies. They had no framework for it. And so there was Margaret learning as she went, looking at compliance and instituting policies, drafting, developing policies, and also standing up a hotline process and how do we manage hotline, et cetera, et cetera. And the interesting aspect was I was very fortunate because I was doing it all in a company that already embraced the value of ethics, right, the importance of compliance. Think about engineering. If you don't follow the rules, buildings fall, right? I mean, it's not thing. So this was an organization that was very much on board with the notion that you follow the rules, and also an organization that believed passionately in doing the right thing. But believing it was not enough. You had to stand up guardrails. You have to translate this big esoteric belief into scorecards and ways to test and verify that people understood the policies and did the right thing. Because sometimes it's not that you don't want to do the right thing. Sometimes you may not know what the right thing is, what the expectations are, especially in a highly regulated field like doing work for the federal government, and overlay that with a highly regulated field of environmental impact on water, on air, nuclear remediation. Those were the areas where this particular company was expanding into, and rules definitely mattered. Culture of compliance was a good thing, but it was not enough. You had to really learn the rules, translate the rules into consumable packets of information that people could absorb and test against and validate against. And so that was very early on, even though I was hired to help the company expand its operations outside of the United States, I was very quickly sharing my time with our PubSec, public sector work and compliance that was required as rules of doing business. I mean, those were table stakes. That was my introduction into compliance space. And it was not really by choice. It's not like one day I woke up and said, what am I going to do today? Let's go into compliance. It's just my client was expanding in the area that had an overlay of compliance requirements that the business was not familiar with. And I was at the forefront of it, and it was up to me to stand it up in a way that would help business grow. So that was one area that was very important and was a foundation for me to become very actively involved in compliance and in ethics in principle. But also at about the same time, or within a couple of years, the company was contemplating going public. And here was a company that's been in business for 40 years. It still had people in it who were founders, or first round of those who joined after the founders. And the company was owned by its employees. It was one of those concepts that I mean, not unusual for a professional organization. Just think about
Right.
it. A group of engineers is very similar to a group of lawyers. You start, and then as you grow in your profession, you become a partner in an engineering firm. But the company was growing rapidly, and it got to a point where it had too many shareholders, and you had to become public just to deal with the requirements that once you have more than X number of shareholders, you had to go public. And this is where the interesting thing happened, because the best companies who have best values live very differently when they're private versus when you become a fishbowl of a public company. Again,
100%.
a ton of compliance issues that were very new to this company. And by now, again, as an outside counsel, recent outside counsel, who I was never a securities lawyer, but I participated on teams that bought divisions of publicly held companies, or bought one publicly held company would buy another publicly held company. So as an M&A lawyer, I had exposure to it.
Right.
Probably more than other members of that legal department. And I didn't hide it, so I got volunteered.
Voluntold sounds like, yeah.
And a few years later, we were public, and we had more than $1 billion in PubSec business. And when my general counsel retired, I was invited to take over. That's kind of my route to becoming a GC of a public company.
How cool.
And also being very steeped in issues of compliance and ethics, because it became a growth engine in a way to the things that were important to the company.
What a cool story. I mean, you got exposed to so many different cool aspects that really, set you up for that position. Let me ask you this though. So I'll ask you this in the form of a story. So when I was in private equity, and this is one of the most, this story had really this massive impression and this massive impact on me. We had a manufacturing company that was kind of a conglomeration of several different companies, and we were looking for more to fold into this platform. And there was this really great company that it looked phenomenal on paper. It was, higher margins, higher growth than all the industry benchmarks, and it was an ESOP. And I was on the due diligence team, and I mean, when you walked in the place, it just felt different. The person at the front desk was smiling. If there was trash on the ground, anyone would pick it up. There was just a vibe. You could feel the whole warmth in the place. And after we took it private, after we liquidated the ESOP, there was just such a crazy change in the culture of the company. And I think it felt like it showed up in employee engagement. They didn't feel like owners anymore. Did you see anything similar with that as you guys moved from being an ESOP into public? And did you see any similar things in reverse as you were buying companies that weren't ESOPs, that weren't steeped in that same kind of foundation?
Absolutely. But actually, my experience with employee ownership started even before I went to law. One of the companies that, frankly, I did a lot of M&A work for in the IT space was the company called SAIC, Science Applications International. And let me take you to mid-1980s, and that was an employee-owned company. And they were not public, and they were not an ESOP. They actually had an employee ownership program where bonuses were given in equity in the company, and then they ran a market internal. They had a broker who ran an internal market for them, so that you can buy more shares if you wished. You can sell your shares. They created liquidity for the shares. But I remember how much the management team believed in the importance of employee ownership. I remember Dr. Beister, who was one of the founders, been a lot of years, but his name sticks with me, and said, "Have you ever washed a rental car?" Never wash a rental car.
Yeah, right.
And there is a huge difference in how you approach the business when you own the stake in the business. And it made all the difference in the world. I felt it again when I was in private practice in a law firm, and it makes a huge difference. And then when I joined one of my clients, which was a large engineering firm, since then they were acquired by somebody else. They're no longer employee owned, but when I joined them, they were. And it was this mental state of having a stake in the business was huge. But as that company grew, and as I said, when I joined them, they were 1 billion, and there were still founders around, and certainly first generation of employees. When they became large, when they became 6 billion, and some of it came from organic growth, and some of it came from acquisitions. And also, since you were now a much bigger company, you brought in much bigger company talent. You know, the head of HR now was not with a background in $500 million. We wanted somebody who would be $10 billion HR director. It was a huge culture change.
Right.
And that culture change was due to a couple of reasons. One, from being a professional company of engineers, and engineers and project managers, it became an engineering and construction company. So you now had two very different types of employees with very different backgrounds and very different drivers. But mostly, it frankly was the leadership team. It was us, because many of us came from the environment that were, $10 billion public companies, and people became means to an end. They became widgets. Mm-hmm. And that totally changed the culture. And while the company continued to grow top line, slowly but surely, the bottom line, the profitability went down. Because now it was not, it just was not as important. Now every decision used to be about my brand. This is a company I owned. I'm an owner. So the decision I make is not just about, is this the right decision for this project? It had to be the right decision for the client with whom I have a lifelong experience, and there will be next project. It's not just this project. So cutting corners on this project was not an option, because there will be a next project. And if I don't support my client now, it will pay forward in a way I don't want it to pay forward to. And so there was this huge culture change. And even when times were difficult, I'm talking about 2008, right? I remember in 2008, between November and January, we lost $1 billion in backlog. In the infrastructure, which was our business, you have this huge backlog, right, of services. But when the economy is down and there's clients cancel projects, they cancel projects very quickly. And so there was this moment of, oh my God, we've lost $1 billion in backlog. We're going into the new year. We're used to going into 2x of guidance, if you would, with backlog. Right. And now I don't, I have 30%. What do we do? Who do we fire? Right? There is this notion of how do I tighten my belts? Who do you fire? But the company was employee owned, and there was this notion of, wait a minute, time out. Yes, the clients are now reacting, but the services we provide are essential services. So take a moment, breathe. We can afford status quo for a quarter or two. And let's see how our clients react. Gives them an opportunity to adjust. Because remember, they still have compliance requirements of clean air and clean water. And these are the essential services we're providing. And they've just spent X amount of money to stand up a manufacturing facility that is going to be unfinished. So give them time to adjust, they will come back. And that faith, and sure enough, by April, we got that backlog back. The projects came back because clients adjusted. But that faith of, hey, let's do the right thing, because not doing the right thing and reacting and firing a bunch of employees, you have that flexibility and ability to think like that only because it's your own company. Whether you are a draftsman or a manager or a VP or a division head, this is your company. and you can afford to take a longer view and you're focused on your reputation versus, oh my God, I lost these projects. Let's do a riff. Let's do a riff and worry about it later. It's just a different mindset.
Yeah. When a brick wall like falls over, it's not because the bricks break, it's because like the mortar breaks, and the mortar is kind of the culture, and that the culture you're talking about can allow for a little more stability during volatility, a little bit of a longer term view, a little bit more of like a little less of like the otherism that makes it easier to like do a rift and just fire some labor units. You're firing your partners essentially in that kind of a scenario.
Yeah. I remember now, fast forward to my current employer. So I'm not talking about the engineering company. I'm a general counsel of a public company now, but it is a controlled company. My founder is still in the business and he holds more than 50%. The rest of it is in public float. And I will never forget, of course, nobody will, March 2020, right? Everything is frozen for a moment and nobody's going to work. And think about what we do. At the time, out of 50,000 employees globally, I may have had 2,000 working from home. The rest were working in brick and mortar sites all over the world.
Right.
In the United States, in the Philippines, in Australia, in Malaysia, in South Africa, in Bulgaria, in the UK, in Canada, in Mexico, in Brazil, everywhere, right? And of course, if you remember, COVID hit quickly, but not all at the same time. It started in Asia, moved to Europe, came to the United States, proceeded to Latin America. And suddenly, pandemic, state of emergency, only essential services, everybody's at home. And again, there was this notion of senior executive meeting, everybody's gathering together for the last time, probably in a year. We moved on to Zoom after that one meeting. And we're all sitting there with social distancing and our masks and everything else. And there is, again, finance people were saying, we can reduce our costs here and pencils down on all outside expenses. And who do we fire? And I remember my CEO, the founder of this company, saying, time out. I have 50,000 families I'm responsible for. So before we start, and they're all scared, just as scared as we are. So before we start being reactive, let's step back and think about what our clients need right now. They need us to keep the lights on. So I don't want this meeting to be about whom we're firing. I want this meeting to be about how do we transition our employees to work from home. Technology, I need solutions. Legal, find out how we do this. Logistics, figure out where our employees are. How do we get in touch with them? How do we get computers to them? And between March 12th and April 10th, 30 days, we moved 40,000 people to work from home. And we moved them not just in Denver, Colorado, or Houston, Texas, or Miami. We moved them in Hyderabad and Ahmedabad, India. And we moved them in little towns in the Philippines. I still get choked up.
Yeah, I'm getting emotional with this. I mean, the cynic in me would...
Mexico City and Leon. And in places where if somebody told us in February 2020 that people can even work remotely.
It's crazy.
So we would have believed that.
Right. And in a month, in less than a month, you made it happen. Yeah.
And the task was very clear because that's tone at the top. That's leadership of saying, before we start firing people, let's figure out how we keep them employed and how do we support our clients. Because in 10 days' time, right now, everybody's in shock. But in 10 days' time, all the CEOs are going to start to figure out how to deal with the situation in hand. We need to be ready. And that's leadership. And that's ethical leadership. Because it's not being reactive. It's not just do whatever it takes right now to save a buck. It's having a big picture. And here's how it paid off. So our clients were financial institutions, healthcare company, travel companies, technology, logistics, you name it. And you would have assumed that companies like travel companies that would be completely shut down in March, April, May of 2020. You would think that those contracts would be pulled immediately, but they weren't, because our travel clients were focused on their customers, because their customers needed to hear about refunds or delays, and they needed to get customers home who were at sea. And our lights were never off. We were always on. And those were the most loyal of relationships.
Yeah.
And the same stories about financial institutions, because people needed to get their benefits, access to their money, grocery stores, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what ethical leadership is all about.
Man, you get me emotional over here myself. It's like, if the values matter, then it's proven. Like everybody talks a big game, right? Everybody talks about ethics. Everybody has a code of conduct, and all the CEOs will get up there for their annual town halls and they're going to say what matters. But like, you can tell who's tough when it's time to fight, if they're going to fight. You can tell if it's real, like when it comes down to it. And like, what a message that sent to your organization. What a message it sent to you. I mean, you had me tearing up that story, because I remember how scary that was. That was a very scary time. And I remember how many other short-term thinking CEOs and short-term thinking leaders were just pulling levers and, rolling people off and just thinking about the next day. But, this guy, and I was going to say, the cynic in me would say, well, that's easy for him to do that because he's so rich. But I think the realist in me would say he would have never gotten to that point if he didn't actually care about his values, and that the values didn't actually mean something, Yeah.
And by the way, when you talk about somebody being so rich, most of this richness that he had, most of the wealth, was in this company.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, it was value preservation by doing the right thing.
Isn't that interesting? That's a very interesting point. That's right. That long-term focus is the key. It really is the key to it all. This was really, really so fun. I would love to have you on again and do something else. We're right at time, so we can wrap up. But thank you so much for coming on, and this was really a great episode.
It's been fun. My pleasure.